actually gonna, yeah, I'm gonna be up here. So we're gonna, we figured you're nice enough to come. We'll give you a little taste of what's in here, and yeah, we'll get into how and why and what's the lowdown in this book. But as Beth and Tom and I have a discussion, and we'll do that for a little while. We'll have some Q&A from you guys. So if you need to think of a question, you can do that. Something we talk about something, just make a note. So yeah, a lot of people who've been in punk rock are no longer with us, and a lot of them are. For, I guess, financial reasons or just better health care, the world of classic rock has been much kinder to them than us. So one of the later chapters called Fallen Soldiers. Fallen soldiers. We didn't even know that we were in an army or in some kind of war. It had been a war of attrition where punk rockers or those associated with punk had not fared well. We all had different reasons for being in the trenches, but all did it with fire and blood. For it's a life that can beat you down, drink by drink, tour by tour, gig by gig, until even the blur gets blurry. The lifestyle becomes addicting, and then the addiction creeps up behind you, puts its arms around you in a warm, tight embrace, and it becomes one very long night on a nationwide and then worldwide tour. But regardless of the value, scale, or goal of the campaign, all the players deserve recognition and honor. And not just because they were there, but because for some time, long or short, they influenced or inspired someone. The early deaths like Darby Crash, Dee Boone, Maxine's sister Muriel, motorcycles. That's an early death. Waiting to happen. The early deaths like Darby Crash from the Germs, Dee Boone from the Minutemen, and Maxine's sister Muriel made us deeper with sadness and hardened us against what we hoped could be a long career that included the occupational hazard of living a hard, fast, and loud life. Some of us, like Country Dick Montana, Jeffrey Lee Pierce, and Top Jimmy, chose lifestyle over life and checked out after many battles, a few victories, and too many losses. What the rest of us couldn't have anticipated was the long haul. What happens after the first blush fades? You don't measure up to either someone else's or your own standards. The money goes up, sometimes way up, and then stagnates or comes down, maybe way down. But our contributions grew from our collective effort, from songwriting, gigs, words, touring, images through photos, movies, posters, art, performance art, radio play, and dedication to search for a different way to say something that might have already been said. Early on, we knew that some of us, like Jeffrey Lee, Texacala Jones from Tex and the Horseheads, Dee Detroit from UXA, or Top Jimmy would struggle. Maybe they'd make it, but probably not. Tex and Dee Dee are thankfully still with us. We accepted the adage that sometimes the wages of sin are death. But some of us were and are still determined to fight the good fight, and maybe somewhere down the line we'd be recognized as doers who stood for something. Here's where the roots rockers and hardcore stand together. Though the music may have been far apart, the desire to offer an alternative to the blandness unifies us and gave respect to the music that started the whole punk rock thing in Los Angeles 5 years prior. Finding origins can be tricky, and everyone wants to point to their contemporaries as ground zero. Thousands and thousands of music lovers may not know Lone Justice, Rank and File, or Green on Red, but it's likely they've heard of Nico Case, or the Avett Brothers and Wilco. They may not have listened to the Gun Club or House of Freaks, but they sure as shit know the White Stripes. Or if not for the big boys from Texas and Fishbone, who knows if funk would have found such a heavy core in the Red Hot Chili Peppers or No Doubt's mix. Your basic punk rocker may not have Flipper or the Circle Jerks on their playlist, but they can probably name half a dozen Green Day or Rancid songs. I'm not saying that those who came later than the pioneers that I've mentioned did anything sneaky or underhanded. They simply got inspired and moved the needle forward with their version of a musical continuum, which is twisted music for people who feel a little more twisted than your casual consumer. What Nico, Jack White, Billy Joe, and Jeff Tweedy have in common is they all got inspired by some kind of music that included the scene called cowpunk, Paisley Underground, or hardcore. Then maybe they went even further to the originators and then turned it into Americana, alt country, funk, punk, country, or truly financially successful punk rock. The soldiers from the 80s worked hard, played hard, toured hard, drank hard, partied hard, or sometimes just sat around and did nothing but dream and drink and fuck off. But they tried, and they did something. Some like Tomato DePlenty and Biscuit Turner, both who are passed on, enjoyed successful second acts as fine artists and received the attention that their bands, the Screamers and the Big Boys, deserved. Others who were still with us, like Mike Ness, Jane Weedland, Dave Alvin, Vanell Houston, and Maria McKee, moved forward with solo careers, while some others currently held down straight jobs. Regardless of whether they have stuck around, checked out, stuck with it, or changed directions, they all deserve honor and congratulations for taking that emotional, creative, and physical risk. They all deserve credit for where they went and how. Credit for the crappy, cold dressing rooms or hot, bubbly audiences 10 times bigger and better than expected. Credit for the hundreds and thousands of miles, day and night, riding in vans, saying stupid or brilliant shit to people you've known forever or just met. Credit for getting paid less and still sending money home. Or being stupid and just blowing on cowboy boots that don't even fit right. Credit for setting up and tearing down the stage and loading and standing by the gear so it doesn't get stolen. Credit for carrying on when all your shit does get stolen and strangers from another band or music store lend you instruments so the songs get played that night. Credit for all the shitty border crossings where everything you have is pulled out and scattered across the parking lot, and you're strip searched in a cold exam room. Credit for still paying attention and writing down a phrase that becomes a chorus. For sliding across and spinning around 360 degrees through 2 or 3 highway lanes on ice and snow. Credit for fighting off the blackness when a bitter reviewer says your last performance or record was inspired and this one wasn't. Or when the insipid A&R guy says, "Can you write more songs like Wild Thing?" Credit for the band who never really leaves hometown. Credit for the band who never really leaves their hometown, but breathes fire for 2 or 3 years. Credit for simply putting up with all the transcendent moments and complete bullshit that invariably happen in rapid succession. Nowadays, when the news arrives that another comrade has crossed over, I greet it with a tight grimace, a light shake of my head, and go on with my day. But the shadow lingers. That small sadness makes a small pocket inside, with all the other brave soldiers who went down before. And I'm grateful for those of us who are still here to sing an old or new song. Still here to tell an old or new story and to continue to be brave for those coming up behind us. Thank you.
We're going to pass 2 mics.
Yeah, we got
We'll
2
figure it
mics.
out.
You can hold on to one at a time, and I can.
Yeah, we can share.
generous rock star over here.
It's all fake just to seem like a nice guy.
Is there anything more punk rock than the motorcycles that do that?
Punk rock or distracting?
Okay, so in doing my research for this, I know, John, at least I know you've answered this question before, and you had a one-word answer to what is the definition of punk, but I Googled it. And this is the definition of punk according to Google. Noun. One, a loud, fast-moving, and aggressive form of music popular in the late 70s and early 80s. Two, informal North American use. A worthless person, often used as a general term of abuse. Thoughts?
Coffee talk. Yeah, it's all that stuff. They don't really say about like being the lady in jail.
Yeah, that's
The
Wayne Kramer wasn't
guy who
Wayne
ends
Kramer
up
in
being the
jail.
lady in jail.
Didn't
Yeah, that's
call
another
that?
version of punk.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah. If you are the receiver, the catcher.
Oh, really?
Not the pitcher. Yes.
Oh,
How
that was
can
not
I
on
be
Google.
more delicate?
You have to scroll down.
Oh, like, I'm with you now. It took me a second, but all right, yeah.
Well, anyway,
We already went there.
the funny thing is that it really is, and now people use it as an adjective for something being punk rock. That's so and so being punk rock, and it may be someone who like Ariana Grande, puts on some shirt and say, oh, it's so punk rock. It's like there is nothing punk rock about it. So it's getting a little blurry, but it really is an ethos, and that's kind of how the legacy part of this comes in the book. For do it yourself, for just somebody saying you can't do that, and you saying, oh really? Well, watch, that kind of thing.
And so, I mean, I guess then, in terms of, if you were to, and I feel like I'm forcing you into parameters, which is very not punk rock, but like, is punk a kind of music? Is it a culture, or a style, or a lifestyle, or a philosophy? Is it a combination thereof? And is it just from 1978 to 1987?
Well, some would argue that.
What do you argue?
I say that it's the prior. It's it's sort of a philosophy. It's how you it's being creative.
Sure. No, it was, someone asked me on this little run what the first punk rock song I ever heard was, and sort of that hesitation, I said Helter Skelter, because that was the first song I remember hearing that didn't sound like the Beatles. It was jarring, it was lyrically confusing, it scared me, I didn't like it at first, much like punk, sorry. It was really, but it also rewired my brain, and it's funny, then we look at it, or I look at it, I'll speak for John here, when trying to explain this to people, the book's kind of this love letter to regionalism, and this is being a native Californian, this is what the LA that rewired what I thought about music and art sounded like. And now it's become sort of wine and cheese, as a friend of mine said, which happens, and I just think that sort of like by the time the Basquiat movement reached me, it had long since ended. And I look at punk as an art movement now, like any other great art movement. I think it does apply to fashion and film, and which is, we'll get into, which is a big part of this book. So I think it's just an art movement.
So specific to the book, this is a follow-up to your first book. Does someone need to read Under the Big Black Sun to fully get More Fun in the New World?
Not at all. Under the Big Black Sun was the time period of 77 to 82. This is 82 to 87. That's the first blush. That's the, what was it like when there's a bunch of misfits that get together in Hollywood and there's no real live music going on, and it's just like having an open palette. And you know, punk rock is kind of like, the music was kind of in the water. It was time for change. It happened in New York, it went to London, and was happening in LA within, you know, like a year, if that, you know, because if you go back even further, you know, there was a lot of stuff like that going on in Detroit, well before that, with Iggy and MC5 and Pere Ubu and people like that. What was the question?
Somebody need to read the book.
You don't have to read the first book. This is the unmaking. This is like the second half. This is when other elements came into the mix. People got signed to major labels and went on tour, and the original Bohemian community started falling apart. Tom, would you like to?
What he said. No, the only reference I think we made to the first book is actually in my introduction, where we talked about we didn't think we'd be writing a second book. If this first sort of, this 10-year sort of artistic earthquake, or whatever you'd like to call it, existed, use that, sure. We picked the first 5 years, or John picked the first 5 years, when we got a book sort of, we didn't think we'd get a book deal, much less it would do well, and really just in order to confine it to something that we can make palatable for people, John was like, well, let's do the first 5 years, because this is sort of the original Bohemian moment. And then when the second one came along, it was like, well, this is easy to do a sequel. We had some challenges getting there, but we knew what time frame we were going to do it, and we had 5 and 5.
And you guys decided the time frame. Is this collectively regarded as the time frame of? All right.
It is now. Yeah,
Well,
I think we locked that in.
Looking back, as what Henry Rollins said in your interview with him in this book, 10 exits past the, I don't know, he had some, like, when you were able to look back, you can kind of see it all much more clearly. He's one of the people, if you're picking up the book today, and you haven't had a chance to look through it yet, it's kind of chapters that are broken down in stories, and there's all sorts of kind of fascinating contributors, from Henry Rollins to Jane Wheatland. Just like an amazing collection of people, in addition to Tom and John, who kind of guide us through this 5 years. How did you decide who gets in?
It was funny. The first book, it was really easy. John just rattled off, like, we should get Band, we should get Jane Wheatland, we get Rollins, we get something. Everyone we asked pretty much said yes. I think one person said yes but didn't come through with the chapter. But we had about 13 writers the first time, and it literally just rolled up this time. It was these are the 10 people or 13 people we should use. And this next time around, it was like John and I were making a party guest list and not really counting the numbers, and at one point we were like, oh shit, we have 23 people. And so pretty much we had a few people that asked to join us this time, which was great because the last book, did well. A few people we definitely wanted to go after. We went after both obvious and non-obvious people to tell the best history, so there's a few names in there that some of you may know, some of you may not, but we felt they were important to the scene. But at one point we had to kind of close the door, and there was a lot of people who were like, oh, we should have asked so-and-so, we should have asked so-and-so, so we're hoping.
Book number 3.
No.
and just so that you understand that Tom and our creative consultant Chrissy kept bothering me 5 or 6 years ago, saying you should write a book. And I'm not like a raconteur. I don't hold forth. And I'll tell a story now and then. They kept saying, oh, you should write a book, and that sounds like, oh, criminy. It's like a lot of work and discipline and things like that. And I didn't want to be the authority. So that's why we got different people to tell their stories. Because as much as I like the equality of women in punk rock, because they were not just pretty singers, although there were some. They played bass, they played drums, they played guitar, they wrote songs, they were equals. I can't write that story. Jane Wheatland can write that story, Exene could write that story. As much as I enjoyed the people from East LA coming into the punk rock world, I can't write the story from a Latino point of view. Robert Lopez or Alves can write that story. So that's how we came up with the kind of formula, if you will. And then in this 5 years, the audience had grown big enough so that it could support a bunch of different subgenres. You know, cowpunk, which is kind of alt country, and you know, the mod scene, which we didn't have enough connection to really cover, or the Paisley Underground, which was sort of like Velvet Underground and some psychedelia and stuff like that. So that's why we ended up having so many writers, and also had to do a lot of editing because people would turn in 10,000 word chapters and we'd ask for 5. You know, and we ended up having like 120,000 word count, which would have been a book like that big. We had to cut that down to something manageable because our publisher said nobody's going to buy this. It's going to cost a lot of money.
And to the person who said book 3, and I said no. That's solely because we were just amazed that we got 2 things that we're really proud of, and we're convinced. Mine probably comes from a Catholic upbringing, that the third one would be Godfather 3. So we're just kind of like, we've got 2 kids, we're really proud of them, they're out in the world. And, but we want everyone, our dream is, and in some cases it's happening, that this is sort of the punk rock sees candy sampler for you, and that everyone that's in here will write their own book because everyone that's there has their own book. And so we want a lot of histories to be written about this time.
I do not have a punk rock history for you, but can you
That
tell
you do.
maybe a little. Can you tell us something that did make the book? Like a good, oh, I wish that could have been chapter 32.
Well, there's a couple of folks that Jeff McDonald from Red Cross was. We wanted Charlotte Cathy, his wife, wrote, and that whole sort of Red Cross kind of 70s pop culture, young teen side of punk rock. You know, the Quincy episode of punk rock didn't make it in.
I got one.
Yeah.
Chuck Dukowski from
Yeah.
Black Flag, and I think he really wanted to because he was very political, and I think Black Flag was the first band that was, you know, socially political in that they always played underage shows. They always had a ticket price that was low, but before Fugazi did that. And Fugazi had this thing where their ticket price was no higher than $5. So, and Chuck wanted to do it, and then, I don't know, he just kind of ran out of steam, or he looked at a blank page and he thought, holy crap, I can't do that, or whatever, you know. It would have been nice. And like I said, the mod scene had some stuff going on. There were like a handful of bands that were really good. Fishbone's the only one that kind of benefited from that.
So one of the chapters is, in addition to reading the book, I got the audiobook, which is wonderful. And in fact, the audiobook of your first book was nominated for a Grammy, if I'm not mistaken.
This is true.
And you were beaten by Carol Burnett.
If you're gonna
Legend,
lose,
we're gonna do it.
We're gonna lose.
Queen
She's been
Tom-
after us. She's been after us from like day one. I saw those guys are going down. You know, build their hopes up and then smash it.
Well,
She's evil.
Yeah, darn.
everyone has shit to say about Carol Burnett. But so I was listening to the Henry Rollins, it's like right in my brain on my way here with my baby in the car. My baby's been listening to Henry Rollins for an hour and 10 minutes. And one of the things that you guys talked about was he really lived in a van in a parking lot, and he like talked about living in this van in a parking lot and how that was real. And like when people came kind of challenged Black Flag, he'd be like, don't talk to me about what's real. I bathed in the rain, I washed my clothes in the Denny's sink, I'm real. And at the same time, there are other chapters kind of talking about dealing with, no shade to the man, but like dealing with the man, like the Warner Brothers record, like dealing with the label. How do you stay real, living in a van, maybe, or I mean, do you have to be living in the van, in the parking lot, washing your clothes in a Denny's sink to be a legit punk musician?
Ooh. No, I don't think so.
So you can,
I
sign
think
a big...
that, if you're not a jerk and you treat people with humanity and you have some empathy and sympathy, then you're a real. If you're a real human being, then you can be authentic, no matter what your thing is. It's like that definition of what is punk rock came later, and I think that it was part of the hard line that people like Fugazi took. Like, you do not deal with the man. You do not sign any kind of a label deal. You make your own records. You so, and it's all DIY. And I'm, I like rock and roll from the 50s, but I'm not a purist. If you're good, you're good, even if it's borrowing a lot from that kind of thing. So it just depends on who you ask. But Henry Rollins is very real, but he doesn't live in a van anymore. It doesn't make him any less real, So that's it. Yeah, it really does depend on who you ask.
Henry Rollins really, though, lived in the van. I mean, he really talks about it.
See, but here's the thing, and he got harassed by the cops every, at every move. They would have cops waiting at the border of a state, and they, haul all their crap out of the van, and then hassle them, and then say, "Okay, go ahead." And it was like, was that necessary? No, but I talk about that. People believe their own hype, and that was part of this second 5 years. You can't help. After a while, I just stopped reading reviews, because they would say that you're the best thing since sliced bread, and then they say, thank God that he jettisoned Exene because she was holding him back. And I just thought, how dare you? She's my partner. She's my. I mean, we weren't married at that point, but she's my, writing partner, and she's my best friend. So, it's hard not to believe that stuff.
Well, and it got it's kind of a double-edged sword. Once you, more and more people discover your music and connect with your music, you are, more and more people discover your music. And, and so with, in Fallen Soldiers, I was kind of struck by how to survive. Wait, there's another question, because Fallen Soldiers is my favorite chapter in the whole book. Do you consider yourself, John, a survivor? Have you survived?
Absolutely. Yeah. So someone asked me earlier today what I regretted, and there are a few things that I wish that could have gone better, but regret is a killer. So there's no reason to regret it. The other thing is that, as you're saying, when there's more people, then there's more money, more bullshit, and that's true. I've seen it in films, I've seen it in music, because there's a big pile of money, it gets put on the table, everybody wants to play around with it. Everybody wants to have their idea put into this movie or some stuff, and it's not the way you get something that's good. You get something that's good where there's a few people that decide, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then do it. And if you go to like those horrible focus groups, and you show it to an audience, you let some dumbbell who doesn't know anything about movies say, oh, I didn't get this part. You're thinking like, well, then watch it again, or open your eyes, or open your mind, or something. It's like, yeah.
Or maybe it's not for you, and it doesn't matter if you
right,
look at it.
or you have some dumbass A&R person who says, why don't you write songs like Wild Thing? It's like, there's about 3 songs that are like Wild Thing. One is Wild Thing, one is Hang On Sloopy, and the other one is not My Baby Does the Hanky Panky, but the Kingsmen. Help me out, Louie, which is actually a R&B song. So anyway, yeah, that's what. I don't know, I got off track. Sorry.
Well, DIY comes up a lot in this of kind of like, which seems very, I know I'm using this an adjective again, but punk rock, to kind of like do it yourself, and instead of letting these voices come in and the collective like round table decide that. What was that? Well, there was one chapter you sound too much like the band you're already in.
Blasters.
Dave Elvis.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite chapters, yeah.
It's really excellent. But with that, is that when punk kind of, so if the first book is kind of punk is going like this, it becomes more known, and is that when it starts to, is that the end? I mean, and I noticed it ended in like 1987, and I was kind of like, is this George Bush's fault?
Yes. That is the one, yes.
Okay, so here I want to bring our creative consultant, Chrissy, into this, because I explained what the book was about to her. And I said it's about the community breaking up, because there was a really sweet bohemian, like 200-300 person community in Hollywood for about 3 or 4 years. And the hardcore scene kind of, and just more people kind of broke that apart. And so that was in 81, 82. And then more people came in, and it would support a scene, and so the scene kind of fractured. And I said, well, this is what happened. The community blew apart, people went on tour, got signed to major record labels, or just went on tour, like all the SST, Black Flag, and Minutemen, for months at a time. People got on drugs, people got lied to by their record companies, and all this stuff happened. She said, that sounds horrible. That sounds like a really depressing, no fun. I would not read that book. And I said, okay, well, what can we include? She said, well, you can include legacy. You can include the fact that you threw some seeds out there, and other people picked them up. And so we got Shepard Fairey, the artist, the street artist, who's probably one of the most influential artists that is living. Allison Anders, who made great movies, or still makes great movies. Tim Robbins, the actor. Tony Hawk, the skateboarder, and Bill Morgan, who also made a film about X. So they took that ethos, the punk rock DIY thing, and said, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do this. And and so that's how, yes, it did maybe have an explosion of skyrocket, and then a bunch of tentacles came down and hit other people, and there were different genres that started. That's what I kind of reference in Fallen Soldier.
It's like that Tina Fey quote, do your thing and don't care what they think. That's fun.
Absolutely.
That's fun. Shepard Fairey just is the guy that did the Hope poster for Obama. He starts his chapter by talking about skateboarding, and then Tony Hawk talks about skateboarding. Can you, what's the connection specifically between skateboarding and punk? Why skateboarding?
I put in the book somewhere, I tried really hard to be a skateboarder. I just stuck at it, fell down a lot. But it was,
it's bad kids.
Yeah, it was
bad kids
you
doing bad stuff.
You didn't want to listen to Journey and go skateboarding. It was, but some people wanted to listen to Journey and go skateboarding.
This is their town, you know.
Fell down, right, not Journey. I meant Artist
Genesis,
Speedway.
Journey played at my high school graduation.
Wow.
Did you skateboard there? Did you skateboard there?
No.
My point. No, but it was. There was two kinds of punk rock, I think. It's funny because for myself, I came in when the first book ended. That's when I saw my first show in '82. So.
Why am I asking how old you are?
I'm 52.
Okay.
And so the first wave of punk rock was legendary. It was like Narnia to us. We'd heard rumors we read about it, and but there was a lot of bands we didn't even hear, because like a band like the Screamers, we knew their logo, but they didn't make a record, and so I didn't know what they sounded like. There was other bands like Chip Kinman and Tony Kinman, who had a band called Rank and File that I became fascinated with. I heard well before I heard the Dills, and so there was these two kinds of punk rock, really, and there was this one element of punk rock that was really helping rewire your brain and kind of go, oh, this is art, much like with Patti Smith and the Talking Heads and people did in New York, when we're going to put it in there, we're going to take some tweezers, we're going to change some stuff around. And then there's other stuff I started listening to when I was 13, and there's that element of just being a 13-year-old. I mean, the great irony is you know, when you're 13, you're going through your sexual prime of no chance of getting lucky, so you're just like, great things. Yeah, I want great things. And so then the hardcore thing where you're just a little boy and you're just listening to hardcore music going like, ah. And some of it, like the Minutemen, was almost like jazz. And it was confusing and really challenging. And some of it was just kind of like, I want to skateboard to it. And the stuff, and both of them stuck around. But a lot of the stuff was really important.
And bad kids.
And I wasn't that bad a kid. I was a pretty good kid, and that's why I got my aggression out through music.
Well, yeah, it doesn't Shepard Fairey say that in his,
Mhm.
but it kind of, he was, this got his aggression out of it, or it rechanneled it in kind of more creative ways. Okay, so in terms of legacy, and like looking back, what specifically now in the rearview mirror is the legacy of LA's punk scene from 1977 through 87?
Ay. Want to take a whack at the new one?
I mean, I think people are rediscovering it and holding it close like they hold a favorite film or a favorite author. And I mean, I think it's...
Oh, go ahead.
No, yeah, I just think what I love about a lot of this music, because the LA scene, unlike New York and London, didn't have a lot of hits. The Go-Go's came out of the LA scene, who were basically erased from the scene. We hope to help change that because they were absolutely part of the LA punk scene. But they were the only sort of bona fide hits where, New York and London had some pretty, Blondie was on the radio. There's a lot of
Blondie's still on the
No,
radio.
absolutely. These were actual hit singles. And so with a lot of this stuff, it's sort of, people are rediscovering it, and I said to someone the other day, I was reading this thing going, I haven't heard of any of these bands, and I went through and listened to them, and there were so many great bands in there, and then I went, I'm not supposed to know about this. It's theirs. And it's really wonderful, and they're singing about the same things because, I think it was easier growing up sort of lower middle class. It was easier to be poor in LA than it is now. You could be poor in LA, you know what I mean, and live and afford an apartment. And so their punk rock and what it represents is sort of what Chrissy helped illustrate was it wasn't just a time. It wasn't just a few songs. It was a way of life that, for better or worse, will always exist.
So the legacy in LA and also around the country, or if you want to make it the world, is that there's young people that are playing or influenced by this music. If it wasn't for punk rock, I don't think there'd be girls' rock camp. And now the first students, or if you want to call them that were at girls' rock camp, are in their 20s, and there's a lot of women that are playing rock and roll music now. Skating Polly is one that we played with quite a bit. Bikini Kill just came back, who were big in the early 90s, and there's people coming up behind them. That's part of the legacy, and something else I can't think. Go ahead.
Does LA, just out of curiosity, did LA's punk scene tend to be more welcoming? There seems to be more women in LA's punk scene compared to New York or London, but I could be.
I don't really know, but I do. I remember what I was going to say is that it's a subculture, like lowriders or weightlifters or whatever, and it's also become kind of a rite of passage. Punk rock has, where there's still, Gilman Street over in Oakland still operates, and there's a punk rock show and there's 5 bands and it costs $10 to get in. And you could be 19 or 16 and get a black eye and go back to school and go, dude, I got a black eye at the punk rock show. And, Beto O'Rourke was in a punk rock band, sort of. And,
Sort of?
Well, sort of. I don't know what he and Cedric and the other guys from At the Drive-In actually played, but he rode around in a station wagon as a bass player, and now he's running for president, so.
And they publicized that and thought that would make him less
They
cool.
thought it would kill him.
And he rides a skateboard.
And he rode a skateboard. That great photo.
Okay, so before we open it up to Q&A, and while you prepare your questions, and I will please raise your hand, I will call on you, and we'll try to keep this organized. I will ask my last question, which is my favorite question to ask smart, famous people. And then are you guys up for signing a few books for people afterwards if we wrap up? Okay. So my question is, what is your musical, I hate the term guilty pleasure, but what would be, clearly not Ariana Grande for John Doe, but like, what would we be surprised to know that you like?
I really like jazz. I do. But it's a certain type. I mean, Rahsaan Roland Kirk or Chet Baker or people like of that. I gave the Art Ensemble of Chicago a try when I was a kid or a young man, and I thought, this is too outside for me. I can't. So yeah, Mose Allison, that kind of thing.
Legit jazz.
Sort of, yeah. I love the station here. Sometimes they play crap, but the 91.9, 91.1 is good. I love driving around San Francisco with jazz on the car radio. It's like, this is cool. I remember when jazz was part of San Francisco.
Yes.
I mean, it still is, but it was like,
Well, when you watch Bullet, when I was a younger, like a teenager, and you saw Bullet, and Steve McQueen and all kinds of other cool-looking people are in a jazz club, it's like, hell yeah, I want to go there. So anyway.
Mine's easy. My big brother had all these Linda Ronstadt albums. Those were roadmaps for rock and roll. That's how I found the Byrds and Neil Young and even Elvis Costello. And I just, those, Heart Like a Wheel was the record that set me off on the path of discovering songwriters.
Linda Ronstadt was cool for a while.
Always. Greatest voices
Dated
ever.
Jerry Brown, famously. Okay, okay, thank you. That was eye-opening. Questions? Hit me up.
don't be shy. We won't.
Sir.
John, what was your take when the second wave of punk got humongously big in the mid-90s?
Oh, the question was, how did I feel about you're talking about like Green Day and Blink-182?
Francis the Jawbreaker and
Yeah.
The Offspring. And
I think at first I was, pissed off because, we deserved that and that kind of thing. But in retrospect, like, there's some good songwriters and there's some bullshit songwriters, I think Billy Joe is a great songwriter, and he's obviously hugely talented. Would I listen to a Blink-182 record? No. But it's like, that's the point at which it was getting to the audience it was designed for. We played for bohemians who are between like 20 and 35. And they're playing for kids. They're playing for like junior high and high school. And it's like awesome. That's when you really need that kind of like blow your mind open music.
But you still perform with X, so who's coming to X shows now?
From 15 to 15 to 70. It's and that's also part of the legacy is that Bikini Kill I would lump in with the punk rock ethos, and there's all kind of there's a lot of interest in that, and the Keith Morris's new band Off is now like flying out to gigs because they can get a paycheck that's 10-15 grand instead of just and we tour and make a nice living, and there's young people, and they're anytime I see a young woman looking up at Exene, someone who's 15 or 16 looking up at Exene going like, God, she's scary and ferocious and cool, I think job is done. My job is done here.
She's kept it up over the years.
What's that?
She's kept it up over the years because
Yeah,
I remember being
absolutely.
15.
She's a badass, and if some young woman sees her, a young kid, wants to be her or wants to be me, and thinks that we might teach him something, like, awesome, great, maybe not.
Well, I was just going to ask kind of a build on that. First of all, you are my favorite band, you and the Clash, I always say. I love Green Day too, so I'm one of the non-15-year-olds that goes to see Green Day. But what I want to ask you is, who are some of the bands that came 10, 20 years later who say to you that you were an influence to them, which I assume Green Day is probably one of them.
Who are the bands that tip a cap to X? I don't really know. Pearl Jam took us on tour.
Billy Joe wrote the forward.
Yeah, Billy Joe wrote the forward to the first book. I don't know. I mean, it's nice if you hear it, but I don't think about it that much.
I'm gonna say across the board, and so my day job is I work as a music publisher in music, and an enormous amount of not only what you consider rock or punk rock bands, but roots artists say X to me. And there's a band I signed a long time ago, and called the Old 97s, and they were been. And they were completely like, we make everything sound like DJ Bone Break. That was the first record. If you listen to the first record, everything is stolen from DJ. So, happily.
I'm gonna have a word.
I mean, the copyright pending.
Question? Can you tell me some of the films that you were in? So I can.
Well, most of them are crappy.
The Good Girl.
You're in Roadhouse.
Roadhouse.
Oh, question
would
about
be
Roadhouse.
number one.
The Good Girl.
Yeah, The Good Girl. I didn't actually say anything in The Good Girl. Yeah.
What's
We
the
all
motorcycle
say
movie?
What's that?
What's the motorcycle movie?
Roadside Prophets
Yeah,
is
okay.
one.
I like that one.
Great Balls of Fire was one. Georgia was one that I was fairly proud of. It was Jennifer Jason Leigh and Mary Winningham.
Pretty nice.
Yeah, Boogie Nights. I played one small part in that. And, there's a few.
Thank you.
There's more than a few. There's like,
Yeah, if you go to the
It's over
IMDb,
50.
Okay.
It's over 50,
Yeah,
but
there's-
it's like I'm not here to talk about my ignominious film career. That's the thing is that if you get an opportunity to do something, I think it's up to it is smart to say yes, and I've tried to do that. I've only recently said no because I didn't get it or I didn't want to have to go there. I've gone on auditions where it's like a sociopathic killer in jail talking to his lawyer who's sent him up the river, and you're trying to be as threatening and so forth like that, and then the casting director says, just have fun with it. This is so inane, I don't even know how to okay, I'll kill you instead of that. So I won't go on auditions unless it's some big deal kind of thing. But,
Thank you.
you can be a mercenary because I can lose money and just kind of make decent money just going out on tour. So I can say, oh, that'll be $7,000 a week, and they'll say nope, and I say fine. But I will do also like small for low budget. I just did that in April. Hopefully that'll turn out.
you did what in April?
A movie. It's a remake of DOA, the Edmund O'Brien movie, but we kind of pared it down and made it make a little more sense. Yeah. And a question about Roadhouse?
Yeah, mustache, your idea or director's idea?
My idea. Yeah, that was another one where one of my daughters looked at me and was like, the other one was I did like frosted tips for this movie called Forces of Nature, and I had my wife at the time warn the kids like, Dad's coming home, he's gonna look weird, right? And my youngest daughter was, I think, 5 or something like that, and we sat on this porch out in the country, and she would like look at me and she'd burst into tears. And then I'd hug her and I'd say, it's okay, it's okay.
Put his hair.
She'd get out of the clinch and she'd look at me, oh, scarred. Yeah.
What advice would both of you guys have about just the music business today and for aspiring musicians?
Well, from the musician's perspective, just learn how to play and sing, and don't rely on Pro Tools and don't rely on somebody else to tell you what to do, and to try to keep your
keep your center, you know, to trust your intuition. If somebody's telling you, well, try this or do that, and like in here, you think like, that's not me, then don't do it. Just say no. And if you think, oh, maybe that is something I could try, then go for it. And from the business side,
sign here. No, I sort of said, one, always understand every part of the business, educate yourself, understand what it is you're hiring somebody to do, be it a manager, a publisher, a record company. The record business and the music business in general relies on musicians being heard and not seen, you know, and they don't really want people to understand the business and just to go along with it, and then the second they lose interest, they'll let it go. The most successful musicians I know are the ones that really understand the business, and it's all out there. And you know, the only dumb question is the one not asked, you know, and never feel anyone to make you feel like you should understand something. Something like publishing, for example. Completely bewildering if you don't understand it. You're in the 99%. And educate yourself like you would anything else, like you would anything you're assigning, and really understand the business, because it's really important. And if you're recording this, don't tell my bosses, hold on to as many rights as you can.
Hell yeah.
Hold on to your rights. Hold on to what?
As many rights as you can, as many of your own rights. So, except the ones you'd want to sell to me, because I'll take really good care of them.
And that sounded completely sincere.
Was it? Did you buy that?
That
Yeah,
was
that's it.
Just a question. I'm thinking about the chronology. I remember in between 82 and 83, I was living in San Diego in 83. All those radio stations were classic rock, and I still remember the night my roommate came home and he said, check this out, you know, something changed. And all of a sudden, you know, X was on the radio, and it just a lot more people were listening to it. But what happened in '87? I can't really think what.
George Bush, remember?
Oh, no.
It's a little arbitrary, I guess. You know, 5 years, 10-year span. You know, by '87, Exene and I were beginning to split apart, and X took a hiatus in '89. I don't have a great answer for that. Maybe Tom does.
Yeah, as I said, just being a fan of it, that was the point, that the experiment a lot of people took in '82 just didn't work. And you know, I always surmise it like this, but it's sort of true. Guns N' Roses won. You know, that just sort of happened. Metal won the strip, and we thought we lost, and the punchline is we didn't. You know,
Did Guns N' Roses lose?
No, everyone won.
Everyone won.
Everyone won. No, but it didn't mean the death of punk rock, which sort of seemed to do.
You know, someone who was around your age, '87, no more shows. The Fenders shut down, the Olympics shut down, all the big punk rock shows.
Yeah.
Gang violence ruined it all, and there was no more. No one would book. Cause I had friends in bands. No one would book punk rock anymore because of the violence and the liability. So that's what killed it.
And with the industry coming in, I mean, do you guys all know the band Law & Justice?
Oh, I love it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they literally went, I'm with you. And spoiler alert, I learned something in this book that I didn't know, that they were actually discovered by Linda Ronstadt. Total circle of life, just like Elton John sang about everybody. It's all in this book. But this is a band that literally went, from the Palomino stage, which was this great honky tonk in the valley, to opening for U2 and arenas, and it was that sort of artificial acceleration by the business that the bands that didn't break up, they accelerated to the point of either imploding or ending.
I'm going to use your answer, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it
That
was sad.
That's a real good answer.
I think the only place I could see X was like at a college.
Yeah.
After '86, '87, all the Cal States.
Colleges and maybe the Roxy and stuff like that. But there's a documentary about the Olympic Auditorium that's in the works, and it seems to be awesome because it's going from when it was a boxing, wrestling arena to the fabulous, not fabulous, from the T-Birds, the Thunderbirds roller derby into punk rock, which is all like blood and sweat, blood, sweat, and tears.
I have an observation and a question. When I first started listening to you guys, I was in Santa Cruz, and we had this great radio station called KFAB. And so I started to hear you guys on that like once, and then I went to some shows up in San Francisco and moved up here. And the shows were just so sweet. And I came from a perspective that they were kind of scary, like you were talking about, like, oh, they look wild and there's this mosh pit. But I met the sweetest people, and the ethos and the philosophy. I mean, everything was just so open, and there was poetry, you know? And it was like, wow, such a revelation. So I don't know, you probably have heard that through time, but you know, that's an
I have,
observation.
and some people said, you know, some people that are married and have been married for a long time said we met at a punk rock show, whether it was X or something else, and yeah, it was, and I think that there's more of that now with these younger bands. Yeah, I think that there's enough bullshit out there that at least here, let's try to, you know, be of one more generous mind.
Do you think you'll take the 2 books to a script to put it in film?
We're doing a documentary for the first book, and Allison Anders is going to be our showrunner, so she's going to be our advocate, and so far so good. Someone has approached us about doing a scripted version of it, and we entertained that. We are still sort of, but I think I'm going to put the kibosh on that because they always get it wrong, and it's going to, if it's no, even if it's the best ever network, it could end up like that horrible show Vinyl. And it was just, it was embarrassing. You know? I don't want to see that. I don't see it ruined, and I think the final nail in that coffin was hearing what everybody had to say about that Motley Crue thing, Dirt.
Oh God!
And, I mean, I hated them. They were on the same
Everyone
label,
hated them.
but everybody said it was just so laughable. They were kind of a cartoon band anyway, but I don't want to get into it.
They speak very highly of you.
I'll laugh along. I'll laugh along even though I didn't hear what she said.
They speak very highly.
They
of you.
speak
Oh, yeah. I'm sure they do.
Any
all right.
more questions?
One last question.
What were some of your favorite punk bands and other early musical influences?
It's all in the book, baby. See, what's in this book are people that didn't get their due. Top Jimmy was a great blues singer, and he killed himself because he drank too much. And Country Dick Montana was a great, like very simple drummer and had this awesome voice. And he passed away because he also did too much of everything. So if people look back on that, or Rank and File, or those other people that I mentioned, the Germs were a complete mess. They were a complete mess, and they would end their shows by playing the song called "Shut Down," which is the like kind of a similar to the Willie Dixon song "Spoonful." Bum 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 bum, and it was endless. And they ended their show through attrition. After 15 minutes of that, they would play it for 10 or 15 minutes, and it was this kind of dirge, like and you just go, okay, you win, I give up. People would just leave, and it'd be over. So, but they were great. There were some transcendent moments. The Alley Cats, the Plugs and the Weirdos were all fantastic bands that didn't really get their due or get great recordings. So, yeah. Tom, you want to add on to that?
It's in the book, baby.
All right. Well,